It is time to bridge the gap between design and development. Hello everyone, I am Roman. Welcome back to the Animations with Rive and Flutter, the series. We've mastered the art of animation in Rive, but now it's time to unleash that power within our Flutter applications. Get ready to seamlessly integrate and control those stunning Rive creations. In this video, we will explore more in depth the Rive Flutter runtime and learn how to load and display Rive animations within our apps. Then we'll dive right into the code, discover how to trigger animations, control playback, respond to events, all from within our Flutter projects. Get ready to create dynamic user interfaces, engaging interactive experiences, and even responsive UI elements, all with the combined power of Rive and Flutter. Don't forget, if you end up liking this video, please make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you can get notified of more upcoming content from Flutter and Rive coming my way. Thank you so much for your support. And with that, let's take our Flutter development to the next level with animations with Rive and Flutter. Let's do this. So in this video, what we're going to be focused on now is the creation that we made and all the animations that we did in Rive, that amazing character that we built and all those amazing animations. Now we're going to bring them into Flutter, into our Flutter project, and then we're going to bring them to life. We're going to load our animations, the one that we created on Rive. We're going to export them as an RIV file. All those animations that you saw, the character, the title, the buttons, and all of that, we're going to bring them and we're going to access them programmatically in code, and we're going to assemble all those pieces and bring this design together. If you see here in the design, this is exactly what we're going to target. So we're going to have one page, which will be the landing page. It will have the title that we created, the mascot title that has like Mr. Bubbles and some bubbles around it. Also, we're going to load the main character is going to be maybe sliding up and just appearing in the page. Then after a few seconds, then we're going to move on to this page. This page will be like the mascot page. We will assemble all the pieces that we built, like the jump button, the wave button. We're going to be creating that hat selection component, and we're going to make it so that our character just shows up in there and is receiving the events and those commands that we will be providing via those buttons and some of the logic that we will incorporate into this application. So you can only select one of the accessories, one of the hats, or you can either jump or wave. We're going to add a gradient behind it. And remember, each one of these artboards is actually transparent. That way we were able to overlay those on top of any other background. We're going to be using that icon and we're going to wrap it inside of an icon button. And then once you click it and you trigger, you will be able to trigger that workflow that will allow you to change the name of your mascot. And then later we will be adding the capability of changing the text, the top label of the mascot title, and you can change it for any name that you want. Also, last but not least, we were going to be dealing with changing the name of the buttons. If you definitely want to do some localization and instead of just using hard-coded text inside of your components, you can actually programmatically change the text at runtime, and that way you can perform your own localization strategy and animate it at the same time. That's what's pretty cool about it, that Rive gives you this capabilities, this flexibility that you can animate, create high quality animations with vector graphics, but also at the same time make them flexible enough that they could be localizable. I'm going to jump right into Visual Studio, but first we need to export our animations. So the way that you do it is you come into your file, you come to this file, and remember it's called Hello Rive. I know that all my animations are there. Everything is all set. I have the hats, I have the mascot title, I have the full body, I have my mascot header, I have all of this perfect. So why don't we do that? What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit export, and then here you're going to click on export, which is going to generate a hello rive.riv file. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to hit export, and then I'm going to override my existing hello rive.riv file, and I'm going to replace it in my Flutter project. So I'm just going to select that old one and override it by the new one. Once it is there, now I'm going to jump back to Visual Studio, replace the previous one, and start doing the coding to bring this to life and import all of these assets into that. So why don't we do that now? So I'm going to keep this on the side, but of course I'm going to have to be gravitating back and forth between those. So I'm going to bring my Hello Rive project, which is right here. And then remember where we left off. Let's just execute it one more time. That way we know where we left off. I'm going to just stretch it all the way over here. I'm going to just run it. I think I ran it inside of an iOS emulator. So here it is. Let's just launch it again. And there it is. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to replace this, remember, this is with the original animation. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace it with the one that we just downloaded. And here it is. I'm going to bring my hello Rive and I'm going to overwrite it within the animations folder. I'm just going to replace it. And there it is. So I've replaced it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start defining exactly the pieces that we're going to bring into fruition. Remember, we mentioned that we're going to do a landing page that will kind of like serve as the introduction of the character. And then after that, we're going to create another page. We're going to call it like mascot page. And this is where you're going to be able to interact with the character. So why don't we start with that, creating these two pages, for example. So let's come over to the folder structure in our Flutter project and start defining some of those pieces. So what I'm going to have is I'm going to create at the inside of lib, I'm going to create a subfolder. I'm going to call it pages. I'll definitely have a widgets folder. This is where I'm going to be creating all those little widgets like the buttons, the character, the hats and whatnot. I'm going to be creating that. I'm going to create a folder for models and enumerations and stuff like that. So I'm going to be creating that. Later on, we'll be adding other pieces, but why don't we start with that? So in my pages, I'm going to have two pages. I'll have one called landing page.dart. And this one is going to be just a simple page. Landing page. Let's just call it that. Let's just add a scaffold for now. And then the body later will define it. But that is our landing page. That is pretty much like the landing. We arrive into this page, we show the title, the character, and then we should be good. We're going to create another one called mascot page.dart. This is the one that we will define for allowing the user to interact with the character and do all those things like jumping, waving, selecting the hats and whatnot. It's just going to be called mascot page. And there it is. This one is going to be pretty much very similar. We're going to have a scaffold as well. So let's just do that. I'll just create a basic scaffold and add that as the body for now. Later, we're going to start fleshing it out. But for now, what I wanted to define is come back here to the main.dart. And in my main file, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a very basic structure. I'm going to keep my material app, but instead of having a home widget, I'm going to have a series of routes. I'm going to use basic navigator. I'm going to use the baked-in navigation capabilities in Flutter. So I'm going to be using the navigator. So that's okay. I hope you guys are okay with that. So I'm going to use this as my initial route. Is going to be the landing page. So I'm going to just say landing page. It's going to be the initial one, of course. And then let me get rid of this and I will do the one for the mascot. So I'll just do mascot and this is going to be the mascot page. So that's said, and now if I reload my application, of course, you will see nothing because nothing has been shown in there. But let's start fleshing out that specific page. Let's go to the landing page and here it is. What I'm going to do is I will create some sort of stack because I want to display the mascot title in here. I want it to come in and then I want to create a widget that will encompass the whole mascot. It may take some parameters because I want it to be very dynamic. Like you want to pass the hat and you want to pass the animation that you want it to perform, whether it's jump or wave or stay idle. So we're going to create that widget first and then we're going to start displaying it on the screen. Let me bring this to the side and now let's flesh out that widget. We're going to come back again to the landing page, but let's start with that first. So in my widgets folder, I'm going to create a new file. I'm just going to call it like that, mascot.dart. And this one, because we're using Rive and I need to handle some events and I want to capture the on Rive init, which is the event that gets fired when the Rive animations get initialized and it gets bootstrapped. That way I can access the state machine internally, all the animations and whatnot. I want to create it as a stateful widget. So I'm going to just call it just like that, stateful widget, and it's going to be called mascot. So it's going to be a stateful widget that will encompass the mascot animation. In here in the state, I'm going to start by defining my animation. I'm going to say late Rive animation. I'm going to use one for the state machine controller. You actually need that in order to capture the state machine. Through that is how you're going to access artboards. You're going to be able to query for inputs, triggers, and all of that. You're going to use that. So create a reference of the state machine controller. So you need a late state machine controller. Let's just call it controller like that for now. And now what I'm going to do is I will override the init state because I need to do a couple of things in there as well. So why don't we start fleshing some things over here. So I'll create the override of the void init state. And in my init state, what I'm going to do is I'm going to initialize the animation by using the assets. So I'm going to say animation, Rive animation.asset. I know where my assets are and I know where the animation is and how it is named. So I say assets, animations, hello Rive dot riv. I'm going to add additional parameters to this. Before we didn't, but now we definitely need it. I'm going to specify the actual artboard that encompasses the mascot. If I go back to our editor, if we see here, the hello Rive file contains multiple artboards. You want to go for the specific artboard that contains your mascot. In this case, I'm going to call it full body because that's exactly what it's called. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say artboard full body. Like that. I'm also going to specify the fit. So I want the fit to be contained, meaning whatever dimension I create the outer containing widget, whichever dimension it is going to force itself into those dimensions and preserving the aspect ratio. So I'm going to call it fit box fit dot contain. And this actually even works. Again, like I mentioned, it sets itself to be as large as possible, but while still containing the source entirely within the target box. Like I mentioned, preserves the aspect ratio within any dimension that I define for it. And I could do that later, but for now, let's keep it like that. And this is an important parameter that we're going to define here, which is the onInit, which provides you a callback that returns the artboard once Rive has identified that the file has loaded successfully and he has found the artboard that you're interested about. Is just going to return it to you. So I'm going to call onInit, and I usually call it onRiveInit. This method needs to be a void method. I'm going to call it onRiveInit, just like that. And it needs to take a parameter of type artboard. Remember, you specify the artboard right here, and you're going to get it as an instance as part of this callback. So you're going to say artboard, and then what you need to do is with that artboard in place, you're going to create an instance of the state machine controller. So you're going to say controller state machine controller dot from artboard. Now what you're going to do is access this state machine, which I happen to call it full body as well. That way I can use that same name when I pass it into my widget, and then I'm able to have an instance of that state machine, and that state machine controller allows me to have access to all the animations, all the inputs, all the triggers, and all of that. So let's go back, and I'm going to say from artboard, I feed the artboard, and I specify the state machine. I'm going to specify full body, which is exactly the same name. So I'm just going to say full body, just like that. Now what do? I grab that artboard and I say add controller, and I pass that controller that I just newed up right now. So I just instantiated this controller, so I assign it right back to the artboard. That way I can control that artboard using that state machine controller. The state machine controller gives you an instance of that state machine. Now I can just use the controller, that state machine controller, and control things, get access to inputs, trigger those things. So that's exactly what we're going to do. Let's for now return the animation just as it has been instantiated here. We've already captured the onInit event. I know that it has loaded, and then I'm just going to load the animation, the default animation. What is it going to do? When the state machine loads initially, remember, it's just going to be the plain character, no hats and anything, in idle mode. That is exactly the animation that I want. So let's display it on the screen. I'm going to go back over. I'm saving. Let's go back to our pages, to the landing page, and let's flesh out this a little bit. So I'm going to go to my page called landing page. What I want to do is I want to do a stack, because here I'm going to add other things and I want to overlap them. For example, the title, the character. I want to add that the widget corresponding to the character, but I want to position it off the screen first, and I want it to come into the screen with a slight animation. Remember what I mentioned? I've seen people do the whole application in Rive, and I've also seen people do the whole application with animations and Flutter. But the best approach is actually combining both worlds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install Flutter animate package. I'll say Flutter pub add Flutter _ animate. And there it is. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add my mascot widget. So with my mascot widget in place, what I want to do is scale it. I wanna make it maybe a little bit bigger. So with my mascot widget in place, I am going to wrap it inside of another widget, probably a transform.scale widget. I will scale this to 1.8 of its original size, and let's see what it starts to look like. So let me just rebuild it. And there it is. Look, I'm already seeing the character coming to life, but I don't want it like that. I want it just to come in from below. So why don't we do this? I'm going to wrap my mascot widget that has been scaled. I am going to wrap it inside a positioned widget, and then I'm going to do the usual properties that you do on a position widget. I'm going to say top 0, bottom -500 because I want it to come from the bottom. I'll just do left 0, right 0 to kind of make it stretch the whole screen and kind of occupy the whole real estate in there. Let's reload it, and you see it's still right below. That's perfect. So I want it to stay there, and I want it to come from the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply an animation to this widget using the Flutter animate package. And the way that you would do it is I'm going to do dot animate. Let's import the Flutter animate package. And then what I will do is I will apply a slide animation on the y-axis. It will begin at probably half of its size, or like 0.45, and then it's going to end right where it is at position 0. Let's apply a curve. So I'll do curves ease in and out, and with a duration of 2 seconds. So let's make it come into the screen with a 2-second duration, and let's also apply a fade in animation. And I'm going to replicate some of the properties already here with a curve and a duration in the same fashion. So let's rebuild. It's going to start from the bottom, fade in, lasting 2 seconds, and then it stays there hovering. That's exactly what I want. Going back to our design, you see that we have the character coming in. Now what we want to do is add the Mr. Bubbles title right at the top. So we'll probably align it at the top. I want an animation of the title coming in with a fade in transition. Maybe start small, then it becomes big. Maybe we'll use some sort of scaling animation as well. So let's try that. I'm going to move this to the side. So what I'm going to do is I need to create the widget that represents the title. So that is exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to create another widget here in my widgets folder, and I'm going to call it mascot title, that dart. It's going to be pretty much the same thing. So you got to get used to that. Exercise that muscle. I'm going to make this as a stateful widget. I will name it mascot title, just like that. Import the rest of the required imports, and I'm going to do pretty much the same thing. But instead of accessing, let's go back to Rive. Remember, this specific widget is called mascot title. If I pause it right here and then I select this one, remember that's exactly why I called that state machine mascot title. That way I can refer to it in code and access it exactly the same way. I'm just gonna copy paste exactly the code that was in the mascot because I don't have anything special in here. So I'm gonna just do select all, copy, bring my mascot title, do it again, and I'm just going to say mascot title. I'm going to replace every instances of mascot in this file by mascot title. I will replace. And now all I need to do is I'm loading from the same file, but the artboard is called mascot title. Also, the artboard is called mascot title, as well as the state machine. So everything here still the same, but instead of returning just the animation and making it contain, I can do this. I can wrap it inside a specific widget, maybe type a sized box. I can just do this. I can say, okay, so wrap it inside of a sized box widget and give it some specific dimensions because I'm interested in not making it flexible at this point. I want to say width 300 with a height of 100, something like that. I'm going to keep it with a specific dimension because I want it to be constrained within those boundaries. So let's save that. Let's come back to the landing page. And now in the landing page, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to add it at the top. I probably will add also an animation. So let's start by adding it right here. I'll say positioned. I'm going to do the same thing as the other one. If I could do alignment, but I want to just bring it a little lower. So I'll do positioned is going to be the mascot title. And then the coordinates of this element will be, for example, I'll do left 0, right 0. But at the top, I want to do 200. So I want to lower it a little bit. I want to keep it at top 200 pixels, so that's okay. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna animate it, or actually, why don't we see if it's coming out? So let's reload it. And there it is, Mr. Bubbles title is showing right there. Maybe bring it a little higher. I'll do like 150. Let's reload it. I think that's perfect because I don't want it to collide or to be touching like the body or anything like that, the full body of the character. Now let's do an animation. I'll probably do the same thing. Animate. Instead of doing like a slide animation, I will do a scale animation. So I'll do a scale XY animation. It will begin at half of its size and it will end at 1.5, maybe a little bit larger. Why don't we do that as opposed to even changing the size? So I'll keep it like that, and then I'll apply a curve. I'll say curves ease in and out, and a duration. Let's do a duration of 1 second, which I think is decent. Instead of scaling, I think it usually does it from the top originally, but I want to do the scale that aligns from the bottom. So I do alignment, bottom center. So I want it kind of like from the bottom and then works its way up until it reaches the full size and then does that. I also wanted to do a fade in. Let's do the same thing as the other one. So I'll fade this in using pretty much the same parameters, using the same curve and using a 1 second duration. So let's reload, and now you will see Mr. Bubbles fading in. I think keeping it at 1 is okay. Let's just reload it again. I think that's more subtle. I think I like this better. So we did a fade in animation, but also at the same time a scale X and Y animation. And then there was that smooth entrance of the character and the title. Let's do it again. And look how cool this is coming out. I love the way that is coming out. Awesome. So you see how fast you're able to implement these kind of animations, make your applications have that extra level of quality. You brought all those animations that you created in Rive and you were able to incorporate it into your Flutter applications. You created those two artboards as separate animations, but in Flutter, you were able to bring them together. And you see how you can do the power of the existing Flutter widgets that provide you with animations with the power of Rive and those complex animations that only Rive can provide you. I think we're pretty much done with our landing page. Let's just keep it really basic. All we're going to do now is like wait a little bit, maybe do like a synthetic delay, and then we're going to navigate to the next page. And then there, I'll meet you there. And then we're going to start fleshing out the other page. Okay, so let's try that. I am going to introduce like I mentioned, like a very synthetic delay on our landing page. I could do that. The landing page, we made it as a stateless widget, but I'm going to turn it into a stateful widget. That way I can do this. I'm going to create a fake timer, like just to introduce a little bit of a delay. So I'll do delayed. I'll do late timer, and then I'm going to say page timer. Remember, you need to import the Dart async, and I'm going to override my void init state, and I will do super.init state. And right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a delay. So I'll do page timer. I will add a duration. In this case, let's do like 6 seconds so that people can appreciate the animation. Later on, we're going to be replacing this delay by actually doing a preloading and pre-caching of our assets. But again, that's for a later video in terms of Rive performance and how you can optimize the loading of these assets. So I'm going to make a 6 second delay. And then right there after that, all I'm going to do is just using the navigator to push another page. So I'll say navigator.push replacement named. Remember, I have my name from my routes. So I'm just going to say /mascot. And that should take me to the next page where I'm going to continue fleshing it out. So I'm going to save that. Let's save it again. Reload is going to last for 6 seconds. So there it is. We're reloading. And now we're going to appreciate the animation. 6 seconds later, then we navigate to the next page. That's exactly what we're going to be doing. Now let's focus on only this page. That way we flesh out all the pieces and bring all those pieces together. Let's try that. So now we're ready to flesh out that mascot page. So if I reload, again, the whole application, you see how the landing page was about. It was to introduce the character, show the title, and then proceed to the next page. For now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the main page and I'm going to keep it so that the mascot page is the root. So for now, I'm just going to do this and make this the root. If I reload, now we're going to always land on the mascot page. For now, we've already taken care of the landing page. We can come back later to it and hook it up. But for now, let's only focus on the mascot page. The first thing that we're going to do, we're going to go to the mascot page right here, the file. And what I'm going to do is instead of the container, this placeholder, I'm going to replace it by a stack. So I'm going to replace it by a stack. I'm going to say stack. and I'm gonna add a children property. And then in here, just based on our design, let's take a look at the design again. We're going to implement some sort of gradient behind it, and then we're going to bring all those pieces into play. We're going to bring the buttons, we're going to be bringing some of these elements, and we're going to bring the icon up here at the app bar level, and make sure to bring the title again of Mr. Bubbles right over here. So let's do exactly that. Let's move it over, and now I'm going to start fleshing it out. So the first thing that I'm going to do is add a container that represents the gradient and is the background of this stack. So I'm going to create a container, and I'm going to apply some colors. So I think I'm going to pick them from my Figma right here, but it's just going to be very straightforward. We'll use a decoration, box decoration with a linear gradient. So we're going to say gradient, linear gradient. We're going to provide the colors, and it's just going to be 2 colors. I'll say colors. The first one will be just white, plain white. I'll do colors.white. In this particular case, I don't care about any theming because it's a unique application. It has only one theme. So it doesn't matter that we provide the colors in here. So that's okay. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to be providing the colors in here. But the best way, remember, is you need to incorporate those colors, trying to add them to a separate file. Maybe you create a common place to add all these properties. So you should be good with that. I will leave that up to you to create. So I'm going to make this a color, like a light blue color. So let me bring it from my Figma. So this is pretty much the color that I'm looking for. Let's reload. I want the direction of the gradient to be at the top center. So let's do begin, alignment, top center, and it ends at alignment dot bottom center. So I want it vertical, starting the white at the top and then the light blue at the bottom. So let's keep it like that. I've already taken care of the background, so I should be good with this. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the layout in some sort of a column fashion. If we go back and refer to the design, we see the title over here, character, the MascotHatSelection, and the 2 action buttons right here. So why don't we go with that? I'll create a column, and then at the top of the column, I think the first item that will be, it will probably be the title. So I'll do mascot. Let's do mascot title, and then the mascot title is just going to be that. That's okay. I think I would probably do, okay, there it is. I think I want to center everything. I could do it in the column. I could do this. I could do main axis alignment dot center, and also cross axis alignment dot center. Save, reload. I think it's looking good, but let's still also add this column to the center. So I will wrap it inside of a center widget. And there it is. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the rest of the pieces in there. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I already added the mascot title. Let's add under that, because I kind of want to split it into 2. I want the bottom piece like a separate column, because maybe later I want to isolate it and I want to maybe add some additional properties to that. I'm going to start adding my mascot, but in this case, remember the first mascot, it just filled the whole screen. This one, I want it within specific boundaries, and I want to constrain it to a given size. So let's try that. I'm going to add a sized box, and the child will be my mascot. There it is. I'm going to import it, and I want as a width, I'll probably want the width of this mascot to be probably 75% of the width of the screen. So why don't we try that? I'll do media query dot size of context, and then I say dot width, right, times 0.75, let's say. If I want to do that, let's see if it comes up. It's still there, but I want to define the height now. Now the height, I want to force it to be a 400 logical pixel size for my mascot, and there it is. Now it's showing up. I love the way that it came out. That is exactly the size that I want for my mascot. Now let's continue adding other elements into it. I'm going to add a little bit of a gap right under my mascot. So let's do a sized box. And let's do a height of 16. You could use any widgets for this. You could use the spacing in the column if you want to. In this case, I want different types of spacing in between. So that's why I'm specifying a size box. Otherwise, the best way to do it is applying the spacing property in the column. Okay. For now, bear with me and let's keep it like this. So let's continue. Now, the next thing that I want to do is I want to create the option of adding the hats right here. So I already have the artboards for the hats. So let's do that. How am I going to load the hats? Remember, I have something called cap hat, B-Day hat, and fun hat. how am I going to access these artboards and display it in my application like this? Let me show you how I proceed. The way that I do it is, remember, I name my artboards and my state machines the same way. And I kind of like to follow this type of approach, like this naming convention. They're all common. They have like unique pieces, but they also have some like suffixes that describes what it actually is. In this case, I call them cap and the suffix of hat. Then you have birthday, hat. Then you have fun, hat. That way I can use that first part and I can use it for multiple things. Let me show you how I approach it. So I'm going to come here in the models folder and I'm going to add a new enums.dart file. So the reason why I added this is because of this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create an enum called MascotHat options. I'm going to create that enum. And remember, I'm going to add the options for when I don't have any hats, when I have the cap, when I have a birthday, and when I have the fun hat. And why did I create it like this? Why? Because of the naming convention that I use, not only for the artboards. In this case, I'm using the first part of the artboard name, and then I do the suffix of the word hat because I know that this is an artboard that represents a hat. But cap, birthday, and fun, they're actually also the name of inputs that I have in here. That way I can use one enumeration that can represent all of those elements at the same time. I can represent not only actions, triggers, inputs, animations, and even artboards. So I'll use one enumeration that I can programmatically use so I can build the names of some of those other elements and I can query them programmatically from my Flutter code. So let's go back to the code. And now that I have my MascotHat options, check this out. I'm going to use these names to actually invoke and to query the name of those specific artboards and load them programmatically. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be creating a MascotHat widget. So that is the first thing that I'm going to create. I'm going to go to my widgets. I'm going to create a file called MascotHat. Dart. We could probably even copy paste the same stuff that I have over here. I'm going to copy the same content because it's the same thing. You're creating a stateful widget. You are importing the same file. The only thing is that the artboard will be different and the state machine will be different as well. Internally, you need to query for some stuff, and that is exactly what we're going to be trying to do here. So let's do this. So instead of mascot title, let's rename this in this file to MascotHat. I'm going to rename that, so that's okay. Now what I'm going to do is this. Check this out. I'm going to save the file, but I am going to provide some specific parameters. One of the parameters is the type of option, the type of hat option that I specified earlier. So I'm going to be creating a final MascotHat options, and I'm just going to call it hat. I'm going to make this part of the constructor, so I'm going to make it require. So I'll say require that hat. The user needs to provide a hat. That way, when we render it, that is exactly what I want. I'm also going to create a final function, and then I will know which is the hat that has been selected. So I'm going to be creating a callback that will match a function that will receive the type of hat that I'm selecting. So I'm going to use that in here. I'm going to call it MascotHat options. And then I'm just going to call it on hat selected. This is going to be used by this widget so that when we click on it, then it can broadcast to whoever's interested. Is going to broadcast which is the widget that has been selected. In this particular case is the one that I'm injecting. For example, if it's just cap or if it's fun or if it's birthday. Let's make also that required. So let's just split this into a couple of lines. That way it is a little bit more readable. Let's do this, let's do that, and then I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna say require this dot on hat selected. So far, so good. Aside from the animation and the state machine, aside from that, what I'm gonna do here is instead of having the artboard hard-coded to be MascotHat, I want it to be the hat that I'm actually bringing in through the widget. So the way that you do this is you do an interpolation, and then you're gonna say widget.hat.name, and then outside of the interpolation, the word hat. Why? Because I'm reusing this enumeration not only for the artboards, but also for the inputs, and then you're gonna see that later on. So if you go back to the Rive, you see that the artboards are actually named like that, with that suffix. Hat, hat, hat. Cap, hat. B-Day hat. fun hat. Let's go back over to our code. Now I know that there's going to be an artboard with that name, so I should be good. Now, I think everything else remains the same. All I need to do is just use that same name over here because the same name of the artboard is the same name of the state machine. So I'm going to copy that and I'm going to say, okay, so when you have finished loading, sure, create me a state machine with that artboard that I supplied to you, and also give me the instance of the state machine that controls this artboard. Now I think it should be good. Perfect. Instead of making this 300 by 100, what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide it a more square dimension. So I could do either size box squared. I could do this size box dot square, and I'm just going to provide the dimension to be 40. So I want my icons, or in this particular case, these hat selections to be 40 by 40. And then I'm going to add that child animation. I'm going to wrap this widget inside a gesture detector because remember, we want to do some clicking capabilities. I want to make it clickable. And then I want to broadcast the actual hat that has been selected by the user. So I'm going to wrap this inside of a gesture detector. I'm going to do the on tap, right? So I could do on tap, and then I will just create an event that does that. And here I'm just going to say widget dot on hat selected, and I'm just going to pass the one that has been selected by the user, which is widget dot hat. I think this widget might be ready to be tested. So I have the mascot hat right there. I know all my hats, so I'm going to do the same one. Let's now bring this over to the mascot page. So let's go to the mascot page, and I kind of want to load it here. So I want to do MascotHatSelection. I want to do it right there. So right now, let's just render it and see how it comes out. So let's just do a row. So I'll just do a row and then children. What would be the children of this? Remember that we have an enumeration called hat options. So we only want the hat options that are not none. I just want the 3 ones that are valid, right? The cap, the fun, and the birthday. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create, maybe I'll do it up here. I'll just do this. I'll say final hats, and then I'll say mascot hat options, right? And I'm going to say that, and then I'm going to say, give me the values where, give me all the values where the hat is not equals to mascot hat options dot none. Bring me everybody else but that, and then I'm just going to say to list. So I'm going to do a word wrap on this, and I'm going to save. So now that I know that my hats are there, so let's try to render those right in line. So now I can come over here and say list.generate hats.length. I know that I have all the hats available right from my enumeration. And now I'm going to do, I'm just going to iterate over that list, and I'm just going to use the generator method. And now here's where I'm going to use that mascot hat that I just created. So let me just do here, return mascot hat. And remember, the mascot hat takes what? It takes a parameter for the hat. So I have to say hat. I'm going to use the hat in the iteration. So I'm going to say final hat, hats index, and I'm going to inject my hat into this parameter, and I'm going to use the on hat selected, and then later I'll probably consume this one. But for now, I think we should be good. Let's see if we can start seeing something at least at this point. Maybe I'll start by adding a spacing of 16 pixels to kind of like give it a little bit of spacing around it. I will also do main axis alignment space between. I want to do some space in between, not space around. So I want to do space in between, and I want to do the cross axis alignment dot center. That way they're within the cross axis alignment, meaning vertical. I want the row to occupy the minimum amount of space. So I do main axis size dot min. Now let's rebuild. We don't see anything yet. Let's rebuild. And there they are. They show a little bit small. Maybe we could try a little bit bigger. So the mascot hat is looking a little tiny, but that's okay. We can just come over and change it from 40 to 80, like I was gonna say right there. And then if I reload, there they are. So right now, you can click, nothing happens, but I know that they're broadcasting their selection. So now what I'm gonna try to do after this is actually bring the other components, which are the 2 buttons. So I want to add the buttons, the jump, and the wave. So let's bring those buttons, and I'm going to do exactly the same treatment as I did with the hats. We're going to come back to the hats, but I just want to, like I mentioned, assemble my UI, and then I'm going to start tweaking each one of those individual components, but let's try to bring those elements into play. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to that enums that I created earlier, and now I'm going to add another option, another set of enums, and I'm going to call this enum mascot actions. And the actions that I want to do are, of course, none, because I want to, let's say this is the idle state or nothing has been going on. I want the character to jump. I want the character to wave. We're going to do the triggering the mascot name. So I'll do mascot name. That's going to be later. So why don't we try that? And then these are going to be the actions that are going to be mapping the inputs, the triggers, and even the artboards that are here. And remember, that is exactly the reason why I named them jump BTN for jump button, wave BTN for wave, and name button for name. I think I have here mascot name, but I think I should call it name. That way I can pull that component later. So I should name it name. That way I could just say name button. And that way I'll use this because this is going to be the one that triggers. This is the one that is going to be querying for that specific artboard, and I'm going to be able to perform that action and do the execution of this button, and the animation will trigger as well. So I have the jump BTN, wave BTN, name BTN. I'm going to use exactly the same approach that I used with the hats. So I'm going to create another widget just like before, and this one is going to be called MascotButton. That dart is going to be pretty much like the hat. So I'm going to copy that, copy all the stuff, bring it into my mascot button. I'm going to rename MascotHat by MascotButton. That's okay. Just keep it like that. Okay, because it's going to rename that. That's okay. So I'm going to do it again. I don't need this. I don't need this. I don't need this. I don't need any of these parameters. So our mascot button will probably won't use this, but what it will actually use is actually that other enumeration. So let's bring it in. Instead, it's going to be the mascot actions, and I'm going to call it action. I want to do just action for now. Later, I'm going to be adding other properties to change the text of the button. But for now, I think we should be good. I'm going to add a callback, of course, for this, and I'm going to call this function mascot actions, and then it would be the on action. Like I know, then I will know which is the button that has been pressed because I'm going to be broadcasting whichever action I pressed. So for now, we should be good. I'm going to add also this as a required constructor parameter. So I'm going to say required this dot on action, and I'm going to add, of course, the on action required this on action. So now we're good. Now let's come back over. Yeah, we're still using the same shared Rive file, but instead of doing hat, remember, I am doing action. And instead of the suffix being hat, this one is BTN. So I'm going to be pulling the corresponding artboard that corresponds to this. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'll say action.name, and the suffix is BTN. I can keep this as in a common place, but for now, let's keep it like that. We're also doing a gesture detector, and I'm going to be broadcasting that. So I'll just do the same thing. I'll do widget dot on action, and then I'll pass the widget dot action. I know which is the event that got triggered, because what I'm going to be doing is I'll either put them within the same widget. There's only going to be one event that will be broadcasted, and is going to be bubbled up the chain, and then someone who's interested is going to capture it. Instead of being a square, I want to actually provide some specific dimensions to this button. So I'm going to do a width of probably 380 with a height of 120. Something like that, and then we will load our button. Now I can instantiate this button by passing it the specific mascot action, and then that specific button will render on the screen. So what are the two buttons that we're going to add right below the hat options? We're going to add the jump and the wave. So let's do exactly that. I'm going to save that mascot button. I'm going to go back to my mascot page right under the row where I am rendering the hat options. I am going to then add those two buttons. So I could either, again, add another spacing in here. I could probably do that. I'm just going to grab size box. I'll do just that right there. Let me then add one of the buttons. So I'm going to do the mascot. I'll do the same approach as before. I'll do mascot button. And then the action, remember, is going to be one of the values that I am specifying. Then the value that I provide in here, if I say, for example, mascot actions dot jump, it will go in internally, the mascot button will internally query for the specific state machine and artboard that corresponds to the jump BTN artboard name. Make sure that it matches that name, and then he's going to render it accordingly. Here is just going to be, whichever action it is, I'm just going to capture that button, and then that's it. I'm just going to capture that value. I'm just going to return it right from inside, and then I'm going to use something else with it. Let me add another. See, that's the reason why I didn't want to add the spacing on all of the other items. I just wanted to add the button right underneath it. I don't need any spacing because they already have some padding around it. So instead of now adding spacing in between the buttons, they already have some spacing around it. And remember that the target item, the target aspect of that button is actually inside the main button. That's what we did in the Rive. And now this one is going to be called the wave. So let's keep it like that. Let's save, bring my emulator and rebuild. We should be able to see the two buttons, and there they are. And check this out. If I press, see, I didn't have to do any coding whatsoever to make this effect come to life. And look, I did the wave, I do the jump, and all I need to do was just create a wrapper widget into which I inject the corresponding value, and then internally just queries for that specific name and just renders it for me. I made it in this very streamlined way that I create one widget that could represent either one of those buttons in a very simple way using an enumeration, and then internally I do some additional massaging of the values so I can just bring them up accordingly. I added a gesture detector. That way I created a very encapsulated widget that represents my mascot button, and I can just use it very easily. Right here, I could just provide some business logic or something in addition that happens when I press that button, and that's exactly what's going to happen. So check this out. That's awesome. So maybe what I could do internally is just, I noticed that instead of being on tap, I actually want the event to actually be triggered when the button comes up, regardless of whether I do it multiple times or I hold it down for a little bit and then I release it. It should be, instead of the on tap, the only change that I'm going to do on the mascot button is change it to the on tap up. Remember, you have some other events in here. You have like the gesture detector. That's why it's a very versatile type of widget. So I'm going to use the gesture detector to help that custom button that I created on Rive to just create this effect that when the button gets released and the on tap up happens, then that's when I execute the animation. So let's reload it one more time. And there it is. Perfect. I love the way that it is coming out. Awesome. And if you see the design, I think it's coming very close to the actual real deal. The last thing that I'm going to add, just to at least finalize the rendering of all the pieces in here, is this app bar button right here on the actions. I'm going to add it right there. So I'm going to create one more widget for the mascot icon, and then I'm going to load that in there as an icon button. So let's wrap this one up with that. So let me just create exactly that. I'm going to create an additional widget. I'm going to call it MascotIcon.dart. It will pretty much be the same thing as all the other ones. So I'm just going to copy this one, and I'm going to go to that mascot icon and rename this to say mascot icon. Replace everything. Perfect. I don't think I need anything else other than just the name of that state machine and the artboard. In this case, it's called, let's make sure that I called it correctly. Let's just go over. It's called mascot icon. If you selected, the state machine is also called mascot icon. So you just come over here and say mascot icon. It's going to load that artboard. It's going to come over. It's going to load the corresponding state machine with the same name. The icon, I'll make it probably 50 by 50. You can even designate these in a constants file. You want to have like your own style guide. You want to have all of that. Please do that. But in this case, I wanted to force it to be at that level because this is a unique widget. This is a unique icon. It's not going to be everywhere else. So I just want to designate it to be 50 by 50 or anything that you feel that you deem appropriate. So now that I have my mascot icon widget, where would I want to place it? I want it to be right here on the app bar, but being like the actions in the actions property. So let's go back to the mascot page. You see that we have the scaffold. So I'm going to do it right on the scaffold level. So I'm going to do app bar, no title, no anything. I'm just going to go straight and leverage the actions property, which gives you the ability to add icons and widgets at the end of the bar, like on the right hand side. So right here, I'm going to add mascot icon. Let's just add it like this. Let's import it. And if I reload it, there it is. But I don't want all that spacing in there. So let's modify the app bar a little bit. Let's go on the scaffold and say extend body behind app bar to be true. That way it does this. I don't want the app bar to have any background. So let's do background colors transparent. So let's reload. So it's transparent. I like that. Also, I don't want just the icon to be there. I want it to be clickable. So instead, I'm going to wrap it around an icon button. Instead of child, of course, I'm going to make this the icon. And I'm going to provide the corresponding required property of the onPressed, and then later on we can handle something in here, but for now let's leave it empty. If I reload the whole thing, now you see my icon is clickable, it is animated, as you can see right there. My character is waiting for commands right now. My hat options are ready to be interacted with. My jump button is ready to broadcast that the character is jumping. The wave is ready to transmit and to let the character know that he wants it to wave. And that's it. So now, which strategy would you incorporate in order to allow the communication of all of these widgets in a very comprehensive way, in a way that you can persist the state and you actually can make these widgets reload and rebuild accordingly based on their determined state? Remember, we're using the state machine from Rive, but we need to also have something on the Flutter side of things that actually matches and triggers and kind of lines up with the state machine on Rive. So that's exactly what we're going to do. How we're going to do it, you can do it anywhere that you see fit. In my case, I am going to be using Riverpod as the state management, reactive, and caching framework so that I can bring this character to life. But in your case, you can use anything you want. You can use provider, you can use block, you can use value notifiers and value listenable builders if you want to do so. In my case, I want to use Riverpod, and you will see how I will do it. So for this portion of the video, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be tying things together with code. I'm going to be triggering those animations that we created in Rive. We're going to be triggering those with code. We're going to be maintaining some state. These widgets need to be communicating with one another, their current state, which one has been selected, which one is currently visible, which is the animation that I want the character to perform at any given time, whether it's jump, whether it's wave. So how will I do that? I will be using Riverpod. So what is Riverpod? Riverpod is this reactive caching and data binding framework that is also used kind of like as state management. And I love it because it allows you to create very dynamic experiences in Flutter. And I would encourage you to watch a couple of the videos on my channel about Riverpod, code generation, and then you can create amazing applications using that. And you can use Riverpod as your state management solution. And remember, state management is nothing more than the strategy that you implement in your application on where your data is located so that multiple widgets can share it. What I'm going to use Riverpod for is to broadcast those changes, to maintain the state of the character, which is the item that has been selected and whatnot. So I'm going to be using Riverpod. Here it is. This is a documentation, but definitely I encourage you to watch a couple of the videos on my channel. Probably I'll leave the link in this video as well, so you can go there and check those out. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to install Riverpod, and I'm going to start creating some of the elements that will come into play to bring this character to life. I've assembled all the pieces of my character, as you see there. Now I'm ready to trigger those events, make them come to life, maintaining some state and whatnot. So let's do that. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I will install Riverpod. So I'll go to the dependencies and add it right down here. I will also add some dev dependencies because I will use Riverpod code generation. So I'm just going to add those down here. Again, remember, refer to the documentation so that you can install Riverpod. This video is not about Riverpod, it's about Flutter and Rive, but you could use any other approach in which you can trigger widgets to rebuild in a comprehensive way. So you could do that. Right now, I'm just going to use Riverpod for this. So let's just install it accordingly. I'm going to kill the application fully because I want to pick up the new files and whatnot. I will also be doing code generation. So I'll be running this Dart build runner behind the scenes so I can create all my providers and whatnot. With this, I'm going to say Dart run build underscore runner watch. Let's do that. So I'm going to be running the build runner behind the scenes so that it generates code for me when it comes to creating the providers, the corresponding providers, so I can create them for my application. So the first thing that I'm going to do now that I've installed Riverpod is I'm going to go all the way to the main application, and I'm going to surround my main app inside a provider scope. I do the provider scope, I add this as a child, and I will import Flutter Riverpod. And there it is. I will remove any unused imports, of course, but there it is. At least for now, I have the provider scope all the way at the root. Let me reload the application from here. So I'm going to do Flutter run. Let's just reload the application. That way we're back here, and then we're going to start adding the pieces that are required for this to come to life. Okay, there it is. So everything seems to be in order. The runner is right here behind the scenes just running. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I need to capture which is the selected hat. That way I can show which is the one currently selected, and I can transmit that information to the character so the character can show it. What I'll also capture is what type of action is been triggered and is been commanded by the application, whether it's jump or wave or whatnot. That's exactly what I'm going to do. So let's do that. I'm going to create a folder right here at the lib level. I'm going to create a folder, and I'm going to call it providers. And just as in Riverpod, you need to create a file that contains all your providers, but you also need to leave room for the generated files that the build runner is generating for you behind the scenes. So inside of the providers, I'll create a file. I'll just call it Mascot Providers. And just as you know in Riverpod, please make sure to go back to my videos and take a look at those. So what I'm going to do in Riverpod is you need to start your providers with the keyword Riverpod, which is a decorator. So you say Riverpod. And then, of course, you need to bring in the annotations for Riverpod and whatnot. That way you should be able to use that Riverpod and annotation. Now I say Riverpod, I'm going to create one for this selected hat. So I'm going to say class. I'm actually going to be creating a class level provider that will encapsulate the selected hat option. So I'm going to say selected mascot hat. You have to say extends. And then the nomenclature, the naming convention for class-based providers in Riverpod is _ selected mascot hat, like this. And then, of course, just as any other class-based provider, you need to override its build method. The build method for this will be a mascot hat options value, right? And then you're going to return the one that I'm going to return by default. It will be none, meaning there's no hat being selected at the moment when your application starts up. I'm saving my provider, and I need to also do here the part. So I have to say part mascot providers.g.dart. This is required whenever you're doing that auto generation, and there it is. The error just goes away. You also need to be providing a method, a helper method that allows you to mutate the state, to change the state internally, because this is what actually triggers the broadcast of the change of the state of this specific provider, so that whichever widget is listening and watching this value knows that it's its turn to rebuild itself and reflect the new value. In this case, I'm just going to call it void update hat. I'm going to pass the updated mascot hat option right into this method parameter. I'm going to say hat, and all you need to do here is mutate the state by saying state equals hat. And just like this, you're ready to then now consume this provider. This provider will be called selected mascot hat provider with that suffix. That is actually how it gets auto-generated by Riverpod. Aside from this, I'm going to need also a provider that holds on to the action that is going to be invoked and triggered by the application. So I'm going to use the same treatment. I'll say Riverpod, and I'm going to create a class called selected mascot action. Extends, same nomenclature, $, selected mascot action. I'm going to override a build method for this class-based provider, and the type is mascot actions. And then you just say build, and you return. Remember, that is exactly why I designated that this is like none. Like this. I'm going to save, but I will also be providing an additional helper method to say update action, and I'll provide the action that will trigger and broadcast the change of the state so that the watching widget rebuilds itself with this new value. So I'm going to say mascot actions, action, and update the state internally. And this is what whichever widget is listening will trigger and will capture that new value and rebuild itself. So with this providers already in place, now let's go back to our page. We need to do a couple of refactoring in here because I'm going to use a consumer widget. This is, again, another type of widget that is provided by Riverpod, which allows you to encapsulate and to concentrate the rebuilds of your widgets to only the regions that you're interested in rebuilding. In our case, we only want the character to listen to those changes and capture the hat changes and the action changes. That way it internally finds those values, captures those values from its internal state machine, and trigger the corresponding levers, like either the input triggers or the input booleans. Like either one of those is going to be triggered internally. So let's do that. I'm going to come back again to the Mascot page. I'm going to close everybody else. But here in let's start with the Mascot page, and I will also do the Mascot. So let's grab that widget. And if you see here, the Mascot right now is only receiving, it's actually not receiving anything. You want the Mascot to receive more than one parameter. You want it to receive the actual action that is provided to it, the one that is going to search internally, query its internal state machine, grab that instance, and then if it's a Boolean input, is going to make it true or false, or if it's an input trigger, it's just going to fire that action. So now that we have those things, let's actually incorporate it into our Mascot. So we're going to add a couple of parameters to our Mascot. Our Mascot will require actions and hats. So I'm going to do a final Mascot actions. I'm going to make it nullable. That way I can just use it. Remember, I used this Mascot initially, and that doesn't need to trigger. We don't need to trigger any additional actions for it in the landing page. So let's make it nullable. That way they're not required, and we can just evaluate whether they're null or not. And then I'm just going to show the default one. So I'm going to do action, but I will import the Mascot actions, and I'm going to add another one for the MascotHat options. I'm just going to call it hat. We're not going to make them required. So I'm just going to say, let's just add it right under here. And I'm just going to say this, that action, this, that hat. We'll evaluate whether they're available or not, whether they're null or not. But other than that, we should be good. Here in the state class, we want to create a couple of maps. We want to map those state machine values, those state machine inputs that are available in there. We're going to query and we're going to cache them internally. That way we can use them to flip those toggles on or off, or to trigger those events internally. So we're going to create a map of MascotHat options, and it's going to map to something that is available in Rive called SMI bool. This is mapping to a Boolean trigger inside of Rive, and is type SMI bool, like state machine input type Boolean. So we're just going to call those hat map. And I'm going to initialize it with an empty map. And now I'm going to do another one for the Mascot actions. And it's going to map to an SMI trigger. Remember, we have inputs that are type number, Boolean, or trigger. Trigger is just like an action. Boolean are just true or false flags. So here we're just going to call those action map and initialize it with an empty dictionary. So now we already have the init state. That's totally fine. Now, when you have ensured that your animation has loaded appropriately, that the state machine controller has been instantiated, that the artboard is bound to the state machine, and now you have everything hooked up to start triggering things and invoking things, right after that is when you start querying for things inside of your state machine, of your instance of the state machine, for that artboard, for the artboard corresponding to the character. So the way that I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the Mascot actions. So I'm going to say final Mascot actions. First, I'm going to say, give me all the Mascot actions, only the available ones, but the ones that are not none. So I'm just going to say regularly Mascot actions that values dot where the action is not equals to Mascot actions dot none. I want everything else other than that. So just give it to me, right? So just give me those. And now I know what my Mascot actions are. Now I'm going to populate that map, and I will use that to trigger those events as they come in when I rebuild my character widget, in this case the Mascot widget. So I'm going to loop through those. I'm just going to say for bar action in Mascot actions, and then all I'm going to do is populate that action map. So I'm going to say action map, and then the key of the action map will be the actual action. as you know, and I'm going to assign to that key is an SMI trigger type of object. How do you query from your state machine controller? How do you query for that name? You remember back in our Rive file, I named it like that specifically for that reason. My inputs right here, my triggers are called wave and jump. And that's exactly the same names that I used inside of my enumeration. If I go back to the Mascot actions, that's exactly what I have. I have jump, wave, and name. Actually, I need to exclude name as well. I only need jump and wave for now. So everything that is not none and everything that is not name, let's use those. So I'm just gonna say, if it's not none and the action is not equals to mascots actions.name. We're gonna use that later. So that's why I'm just excluding those for now. Let's keep it like this. Perfect. Then just return a list out of that. And then all I'm going to do is now query for this particular inputs, which are type trigger. Remember, these two are trigger, but these three are Boolean. So how do you query that from Flutter? This is how you do it. You say controller dot find SMI, meaning state machine input. You could say of type SMI trigger, and then you provide the name of that trigger. In that particular case, out of my Mascot actions, out of that filtered list, I'm going to provide the action.name. And then that way I can just get my value right from there. So I'm going to find an SMI of type trigger with the name action.name. It could either be wave or it could either be jump. So only those two have been filtered out of my list, and I'm going to find SMI triggers or inputs of type trigger out of my state machine. Now that I know that I've mapped that there and I'm all set, let's now do the same thing for the hats. So I'm going to load all the hats except for the ones that are none. So I'll just say final all hats, Mascot hat options, that values where my hat not equals to Mascot hat options.none to list, and then it gives me all of them. So now that I've acquired all my hats, now I'm gonna loop through those. Well, actually, you can even do it in the same line, but at least I wanted you to see where I'm extracting that from. So I'm just gonna loop for var hat in all hats, and then populate that same map. We're gonna say hat map. The key is the actual hat, so say hat. And then you need to query now for those Boolean inputs. You need to find B-Day, fun, and cap. If you go back, the Mascot hat options are cap, B-Day, and fun, exactly the same way that I named them here. That's why I told you naming convention is very key. Let's go back over, and all I'm gonna do here, the way that you query for Boolean inputs in your state machine via the state machine controller is controller.find input. And then you can say bool because it's a Boolean, and then you say hat.name like this. You can cast it into an SMI bool, so you can say ask SMI bool. You could have done the same thing up here. For example, you could have said find SMI, and then once you get the value, you could say ask SMI trigger, and then you can just cast it like this. So you could do it either way. I would recommend going like that. That way you're explicitly casted to the value that you know is going to be the one. If it blows up, then you can debug it or whatnot, but at least this is fine. There's only one problem. When on Rive init gets triggered, that callback telling you that the animation has loaded appropriately, it has instantiated the controller, your widget may be receiving commands like right away. So one way that you can prevent from the application to receive events and to query for those inputs or triggers that are not readily available, you could do like a deferred loading, or you can actually create a flag that only when the actions and the inputs and the triggers have been found, then is when you allow the user to do that, because the widget may still be loading. So one way to do it is you do it like this. You go all the way at the top and you create a flag called like bool is complete, is loading, complete equals false, right? And because you know that on Rive init executes only once because it has been instantiated in the init state. And then once you get your callback, you know that now that widget has finished loading and everything has been found, all those instances have been mapped appropriately. Then in the build method of your widget, you verify whether that value is true, but only after you turn that flag to true after all of this is done. So you could just do here a set state is loading complete equals true. And then here in the build method, like I mentioned, then you check if loading is complete. Only and only if is only when you can extract the values from that map and then either flip them to true, flip them to false, trigger an event. Only when you know that everything has been found, everything has been queried, you already have your references all set, the map is already populated, because you could have done it. It could have just painted the widget initially, but it's still executing the rest of the logic to just populate those things. This is a very safe way to ensure that your widget has loaded fully with all its dependencies fulfilled. So one way that you can do is, okay, you check that if it's complete, then what you do is you check whether that, remember, those two actions, the action and the hat, are not null. Then you can perform the query or you can trigger the event. The way that I'm going to do it, I'm just going to say if widget.action is not null and the widget.action is not equals to MascotActions.none. Remember, when it's none, I just want it to just do anything. I don't want it to do anything. I just want it to remain as is. So, but if it's not none, then I only want to listen for the actions that are either jump or wave. Where do I have those values? I have them already mapped in that action map. So I'm going to say action map. I'm going to find the value that has been injected via this widget when I reload it and I listen for that action that was triggered. The widget rebuilds with this new value and I'm going to say widget.action. This is the action that has been passed into the widget after it has been loaded. And how do you execute a trigger from Flutter? One trigger that is available in Rive. This is how you do it. .fire. .fire is the method that equates to doing this. Like if I'm executing my logic, like I am running my animation and I just hit jump. So this is the same as doing .fire in Flutter. If I click here on the wave, it's the same as doing .fire on the wave SMI trigger instance that I have on my map associated with the enum value of wave. So like I showed you here, I created this map. That's how I'm able to trigger those actions. Let's do the same thing for the hat within the is loading complete. So I'm going to do the same thing. If widget.hat, remember, it's not null, and the widget.hat is not none. So in this case, not equals to MascotHatOptions.none. Okay, so if it's not any one of those, just show me, because remember, if you just none, that means no, there's nothing selected. Just keep it normal. All I'm going to do is now I'm going to loop through all of my hat options, and remember, only one should be true, the other ones should be false, and that is what actually makes this logic right here light up. Like if I click either birthday, it's only because birthday is true, cap and fun are false. If I do fun is true, is because fun is true and the other ones are false. So that is exactly the same logic that I'm going to equate right here. And the way that I'm going to do is just a regular loop. So I'm just going to loop through all the entries in my hat map. So I'm going to say hat entry in hat map.entries. And what am I going to do? I'm just going to either turn it to true or false by doing this. Hat entry.value. I know that the value is actually the SMI Boolean. Now what I'm going to do is that entry.value, I'm going to say .change. And change, if you see there, is a convenient method for changing that backing value of your SMI input, of your state machine input. In this case, it's a Boolean. So change will receive the value that you pass it. What is the value? Only is going to be true if the hat entry dot key equals to the one that is coming in. Which is the one coming in? The widget.hat. So this is the widget that is actually coming in. Only is going to be true if it matches the one that I am actually passing into my mascot. Remember, that mascot is going to be rebuilding when those providers that we created earlier get triggered and they notify the state change. If the hat is cap, only the one that is cap will be true. The other ones will be false. And that's it. Everything else is still the same. I don't need to change anything. I'm just gonna keep it like that. And I think we've already created the logic for the mascot. Now the mascot is ready to receive some of those values that will be broadcasted, that will be notified by the providers whenever we place them in strategic locations. For example, I'm gonna place them in the actions of the buttons, and I'm also gonna change the hat providers in the selection, in the hat option selection. So let's do that in the next section of the video. So now in this video, what we're going to do is consume the providers that we created earlier. We're going to bring our character to life by notifying it of the hat options based on the changed state of the providers associated with the actions and the hats as well. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing now. We're going to do a little bit of refactoring. That way you can accommodate the logic that we're going to bring in now. So back into the mascots page, if you see here, I created like this row with all the hats. What I'm going to do is I'm going to encapsulate this in another widget, because all I want to get from here is the corresponding hat option that was selected by the user. Then I will also inject which is the current hat that is selected. That way we can show it in a corresponding way, like with a border or something. We're going to highlight it in such a way that is very unique. For example, in this particular case, it shows you all the options, but it doesn't show you which is the one that is currently selected. So that is exactly what we're going to be working on now. So let's do that. I'm going to create another widget. I'm just going to call it MascotHatSelection. MascotHatSelection.dart. This widget will encapsulate that logic that I just showed you earlier. So I'm just going to make this into a stateless widget. I'll call it MascotHatSelection. Let me import this. Now I'll bring my logic from there and I'll bring it right over here. I'll bring my MascotHatSelection widget right here. Let me bring some of that initial logic right over. This is perfect. And then I will import whatever else is missing. Let me bring the mascot hat. That's perfect. I also, of course, need to bring that logic because I didn't want to keep it here. I want to have it more encapsulated within that widget. This didn't feel comfortable, so I'd rather have it right here in a more encapsulated fashion. All I need to know from this widget is which is the hat that has been selected. That's all. You don't need to know anything else. I will create a couple of parameters. For example, the hat option that has been selected currently, remember that is going to be persisted within a provider. So that provider will also supply it to this widget. I could also listen to it, but in this particular case, I could just inject it and then I match, is this the one that is selected by the widget as well? I can do so. So I'm going to feed into this widget the final mascot hat option, which is the mascot that has been selected. So I'll just call it hat option. Right? And then also I'm going to add one callback, one method that it will just going to broadcast, is just going to bubble up, which is one of the three hats that has been selected, and just going to notify the parent of which one it is. So I'm just going to do that. Final function, mascot hat options. And then I'm just going to call it like that, on hat selected. Let's make those two required because I definitely want them to be provided by the user. So I'll do this dot hat option and require this dot on hat selected. I know that those are the two parameters, the hat option, the one that is currently being selected, the one that is being governed by the provider, by Riverpod. Riverpod knows which is the one that is currently selected. And given that aspect, I will display the corresponding style that will make it look like it is selected. That way the user knows, oh, this is the one that is currently selected. I know I'm looking at it, but at least I want in a visual representation, which is the one that is currently selected in this particular widget. So with that, let me continue. And what I'm going to do is I am going to provide some styling to this widget. Like, it's not just the mascot hat. I think I want to surround this within a container. Let's use a container. I'm going to do like a padding around this. Let's do 8 pixels all around it. I'm going to do some decoration because I want to do like a border radius. Let's do border radius, and then I'll do border radius circular. Let's also do like 16 pixels all around it. I want to add a border around it. So let's use the border property and say border.all and only apply a color only when the current hat, the hat option that has been injected into this widget corresponds to the one that is in the loop. So then that way I'm going to color it differently. So I'm going to say color if the hat, the current hat in the iteration is equals to the hat option that has been injected. If I just say hat option like that, then let's make it the color. I think I could use like a blue accent, something like that. Otherwise, give me a white color with some opacity. So I'll use with values. And I'm going to pass an alpha of like 0.25, something like very subtle, nothing too fancy, nothing too crazy. But at least what I want to do is only when the selected widget that is being kept by Riverpod, and I know that this is the currently one selected, just mark it as selected within this list, and then that way the user knows which one it is. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep using that on hat selected event that I created to bubble up the event, and I'm just going to pass that current one. I could either pass the same one, I'm just going to pass the one that is right there. So there it is. So I'm just going to pass the same value right there. It's just going to be bubbled up all the way here. And all I'm going to do is within this widget, I'm going to pass two things. I need to pass the hat option. For now, I don't know what that hat option is because I haven't brought in Riverpod. I'm going to bring it in just a minute. For now, I'm just going to say MascotHatOptions.cap just to see if it actually gets highlighted. And I'm going to tie in and I'm going to wire up the on hat selected event. And there it is. Now let's see if just by passing the option of cap is going to mark it as selected inside of that widget. Let's take a look. So I'm going to save that. And here, if you say MascotHatSelection, I'm just going to pass cap. This should have like a border around it. So let's reload it. There it is. It's going to have like a blue border. Why don't we make the border of that widget a little thicker? So let me go to the MascotHatSelection. I set color, but I also want to add like a width to that border. Let's try 8 pixels. Let's reload. That looks more like it. If I change it to birthday, if I reload, you see how the other ones become lighter white and this one becomes blue, the blue accent. That is exactly what I want. So now Riverpod is going to capture the value that the user is selecting. Initially will be none, but if the user selects, is going to then capture that value, maintain it, is going to cache it, but it will also notify the parent widget, which is that mascot one, and he's going to supply that value to it. So that widget itself is going to rebuild with that new value and know what to display. Oh, it's the birthday hat. So let me rebuild myself and display the birthday hat. So let's try that. What I'm going to do is we have the mascot title, we have the mascot, and we have the MascotHatSelection. Why don't we do this? I'm going to be wrapping those two widgets within the same consumer because both of them will depend on listening to the selected mascot action and also the selected mascot hat. Like this widget, the mascot widget is going to be listening to those two, but I also need the same consumer because the mascot hat options is also going to be needing a reference to ref, the widget ref, that is going to allow me to get an instance to those providers so I can then update the corresponding value internally inside of those providers. So why don't we try that? Well, I realized also that the mascot buttons will also require an instance of that provider. Why don't I grab all of these widgets right here? I will wrap them inside of a column. And now what I'm going to do is this column, I am going to wrap it inside of a consumer because all of this will need to be rebuilt. I don't need to rebuild some of the other outer widgets. I don't need to rebuild the whole page. That's why I didn't convert this whole page as a consumer widget. At a minimum, I want all of those three widgets to be within the same consumer, and the three of them will have access to the same widget reference that will be required to change the values of the providers that I'm going to be watching. So let's rebuild our application once again. But you see now I've wrapped in a column all of these widgets right here, both buttons, the MascotHatSelection widget and the mascot widget within the same column because I want them all to be listening to the same providers. So that is exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to wrap that column inside of a consumer widget. Then I'm going to provide the ref and a child right here. And what I'm going to be listening is I'm going to be listening to the selected mascot action provider. So I'm going to have the mascot action right here. And I'm going to say ref.watch selected mascot action provider. What this will do, this will listen, this will watch for any changes on the selected mascot action. This is going to be triggered by either the jump or the wave button. We're going to be updating the selected mascot action value underneath it via the update method. We're going to show you in just a second. Now I want to do the mascot hat and watch on the selected MascotHat provider, and this will actually be triggered by the MascotHatSelection widget, the one that we just created right there. So if you just listen to these two, this is pretty much there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to wire those events right down here. So check this out. I am going to go to the MascotHatSelection, and the MascotHatSelection is just going to give me one event, just the one that has been selected. It's just going to be one. The way that you notify Riverpod that you want to update the value so that other widgets that are interested in knowing about that value, they receive it. So the way that you do it is says ref.read selected mascot hat provider, because we're going to be doing the hat first. So selected hat provider. Let me wrap the value, that way you see it fully, or I can just collapse this for a second. And I'm going to say selected mascot hat provider dot notifier dot update hat, and then I'm going to pass the value of the hat. But in this case, it's called P0. So I'm just going to rename this to value, and I'm going to pass the value right there. Let's take a look now. What I need to do is pass the hat option right over here, because it's the one that has been changed by the provider. We change it here, and we listen to it right over here. So I'm going to say mascot hat. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to that mascot, and I'm going to pass the hat option that has just been changed and has just been triggered by the MascotHatSelection as well. So I'm going to pass that same value of MascotHat. Let's see if this works. I'm going to reload. And check this out. If I click this one, the cap hat, there it is. We see it right there. If I click on this one, it switches to the birthday hat. And then if I click on this one, it changes to the font hat. And you can just toggle it like this. Very cool. I love the way that this is coming together. And you saw how I was able to, those two widgets, even though they're part of the same Rive file, they're on separate state machines, they are on separate artboards, I was able to bring them together with the power of Rive and Flutter. And you see how seamless it looks? I can show in the MascotHat options, I show the one that is currently being selected, thanks to Riverpod, because it holds the value of the currently selected hat option. If you rebuild it from the beginning, you see that even the mascot shows it accordingly. None of the hats is selected, so everything is false. But then immediately when I select this one, I trigger that action. I send it not only to the mascot hat options, but I also send it to the mascot, and the mascot knows which is the corresponding hat that it needs to be displaying at any given time. So there it is. Now let's wire up the actions, and let's see if that works as seamless as we did just now. So in the mascot button, we have the jump, and here we have the action for wave. So we're going to do exactly that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the same approach. I'm going to say ref.read, but in this case is the action. So I'm going to say selected mascot action provider dot notifier, and then I'm going to say dot update action, and I'm going to pass the action that is right here, whichever action. If it's jump, it's going to be jump right here. And I'm going to copy this right down here as well, which I'm going to rename value as well. And of course, because this action has been changed by this button and reflected via Riverpod, we are watching for this action right there. All I need to do is pass it inside of the mascot, and I'll say action, mascot, action. We are triggering it down here. We're listening to it up here. We inject it inside of the mascot. The mascot, since we did the logic earlier, it should know what to do already. So I'm going to save that, reload the application, and check this out. I could do hat and jump. I could do wave. I could do birthday, jump. I could do fun. I could do jump. But check this out. Why is jump not working? Why do you think that? If I click on this one, then the jump happened. Why is that? I'll tell you why. Remember, Riverpod is great at when value changes. Right now, if you say jump once, but if you say wave, it's a different value from jump. If you hit wave again, that was the one that you just did. Riverpod is amazing at detecting different changes, but it's also optimizing the way that it caches the previous values by persisting the previous one. And if it noticed that it's exactly the same value, it says, there's no need in rebuilding. You just did the same value. I could just hit wave multiple times, and it's only going to happen once. That is the power of the reactive caching and data binding of Riverpod. And because of this, I'm just saying wave the same time. The next time it says, wait, I already cached this value. I already know that you want to wave. I'm not going to rebuild again. Now what you want to do instead is you want to invalidate that value. The way that you do it is with a method called refresh. What does it do? It invalidates the previous value and then it reads it again. But there is a convenient way that you could do it. You could do it in two ways. First, you say ref dot invalidate, and then you pass the name of the provider like this. I'm going to copy it, paste it right over here as well. We invalidate the value and then we read it again. With this, we're telling Riverpod the value is dirty. Rebuild yourself again. Doesn't matter that it was the same one. So let's reload it one more time. And now I can say jump and then jump again. And you see that now it doesn't matter that the previous value it was the same, where I'm telling Riverpod, don't cache it, please. Mark it as dirty. Rebuild yourself again. I want to repeat it. This is actually what I want to do. Even though you feel like it's not efficient, I actually want to rebuild. And there it is. But instead of doing this, there's one convenient method called refresh that actually is syntactic sugar around these two calls. So instead of doing invalidate and then read, you can remove the invalidate, replace the read by refresh, and it does exactly the same thing. It invalidates the previous provided value. It invalidates that value that Riverpod is caching for you, and then it's just reading it again. So invalidate, and then you read it again. I'm going to refresh here as well, and now I'm going to rebuild it, and now you see that it works exactly like it was before. I'll select the hat. I can hit wave. I can do this one. Another thing, look, even if I select this hat, is actually caching the previous action value. I don't want that. Why don't we do this? When you select the hat, because I don't want to re-execute the action value that has been provided to the mascot. I don't want to re-render. I don't want to re-execute the action value that has been provided to the mascot. What I want is when you select the hats, I don't want any mascot actions. I just want the hats to be changed. So the way that you go is, let's go over to the hat, and then right here in the hat, what I'm going to do is just I'm going to make no actions or mark it as none. That way it just doesn't do any actions at all, and it only does the changing of the hat. So you do ref.read selected mascot action provider dot notifier, and then you say update action, just make it none. Simple as that. Now when I'm switching hats, I don't want any actions. Not like this. Look, I don't want this. I change a hat and then it jumps. If I hit wave, that was the last action. But then if I do this, see, it persists that. You don't want that. Just reset it to none. And now I am going to hit it, reload, and check this out. I can change hats. I can do a jump, but I can continue changing hats and I don't need to see the previous action that was created by the user. So I like the way that this is coming out. I hit the wave, I hit the jump, I can switch hats, and all is good and amazing. I hope that you liked this video. I know it was pretty long as well, but I know that I wanted to cover as much as I could and explain it with details and show you exactly where everything comes from. We already went over installing Riverpod. So we not only use it as a data binding framework or reactive caching, but we also used it as a state management. We were able to create consumers, refactor a couple of the widgets to make them more reusable. Now you see how responsive it is and how reactive it is. Whenever I change the options on the hat, you see them reflected on the character, but also when I press the jump, I also see the action being executed, the correct action being executed. Now we've made such an amazing progress, and now we're ready to embark on the next level of this journey where we're actually going to be able to change text from Flutter available in Rive, and you're going to see how easy that is. So the next video will be dealing with changing text from Flutter, and you're going to see how much more flexible you can make this application. So see you on the next video. Hey everyone, I'm Roman. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on other Flutter content coming my way. Thank you so much for your support. Also, don't forget to follow me on social media.